Hey, good people. Chris Hewerts coming at you live from Omaha, Nebraska. Hope everybody's having a good Monday. Thanks so much for joining us for our Monday Wellness webinar. I think you're going to love the guest that we have today. He's a dear friend of both Felina and myself. Him and I serve on a board of directors together, and I've just loved collaborating with him. I can't believe it's Monday. I was just trying to remember what I was doing yesterday, Easter morning actually, and I was like, wait, that was just yesterday? And again, I just kind of feel like time has completely slowed down and become its own sort of relative thing. We're looking forward to another great week here, I think, of hopefully what are going to be super duper conversations, and we're really glad that y'all have made a point to join us. I of course love to sort of holler and point out who's in the room, and so let me pull that up here really quick and let you all know that together we are coming in from Australia, Canada, India, Denmark, Egypt, New Zealand, South Africa, the United Kingdom, and the US, and actually coming in from all over the US. And I do love this. And since we've started these free webinars in April, and we'll continue to go through the end of April, we've had over 900 people register for these from 13 countries. And so what's great about that is it kind of brings the world together a little bit. If you were with us on Friday's webinar with Morgan Harper Nichols, and she taught all of us sort of a mindfulness art project, these are some of the folks that sent in images during that and since that show. And there you see Basil, he really killed the mountains and the birds. But it was super duper fun. And if you missed it, the playback is up on Vimeo, and we'll also put all these playbacks on YouTube. But I think these kids contemplation events are just turning out to be a blast. And then the last thing I wanted to do was to thank everybody for joining us today. This is Felina's and my 24th wedding anniversary. And that's why I'm rocking the love hoodie, for love, everything in moderation but love. So we're celebrating the COVID anniversary, and I was trying to find out like what the gift is for COVID anniversary, and there is not sort of a traditional COVID gift. I guess on the 24th anniversary, it's supposed to be stone, and so I'm trying to figure out like what's a good stone themed gift that I can offer her. But if anybody has the sort of COVID themed gift, I was thinking maybe masks or something cute, something a little provocative. That might be an option. Anyway, we are super duper glad you're here. I think you're gonna love Stephan. And so hey, I'm gonna turn it over to Felina, and thanks for joining us, everyone.
Happy anniversary, Chris, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, the COVID anniversary. This is one we'll never forget, I'm sure. Welcome, everybody. We're really glad that you're with us today. I want to begin with a brief guided meditation just to help us all transition and get into the present moment with each other. So let me just see. Hold on just a minute. I need to send a little message to see if I can fix my screen here. All right, so as you're finding yourself in the webinar, why don't you bring some attention to your body and find yourself in your seat. So just take some time to get comfortable. See if you can allow the body to be 5 to 10% more comfortable. And as you settle in, why don't we take a couple of deep breaths together here, inhaling deeply from the belly. And exhale. Again, inhale deeply. And exhale completely. And just letting the breath bring the mind down into the heart, which is situated in the body. So just following that automatic rhythmic inflow and outflow of breath. Noticing the breath as it goes in and down on the inhale and up and out on the exhale. And just notice the faithfulness of the breath, the way it's always working for you, for your benefit, for your survival, without you having to think about it. Notice the rise and fall of the belly and the chest. You might even like to place a hand on the chest and belly just to make more tangible connection here. Just noticing this gift of breath, sustaining you, and helping you to be right here, right now. I invite you to stay with the breath as I offer a reading from John O'Donohue's book, To Bless the Space Between Us. This is his blessing called For Presence. So it's a blessing for presence. Stay connected to your breath as I read here. Awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. Have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. Receive encouragement when new frontiers beckon. Respond to the call of your gift and the courage to follow its path. Let the flame of anger free you of all falsity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame. May anxiety never linger about you. May your outer dignity mirror an inner dignity of soul. Take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. Be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift woven around the heart of wonder. So I'd love to invite Stephan to join us on the webinar now as he turns his microphone and video on. Stephan is joining us from Orlando, Florida. Hi, Stephan.
Hello.
Good
nice
to
be
see
here.
you. Yeah,
Good
glad to have you with us. I wanted to just tell our attendees a little bit about you. So Stephan is a licensed mental health therapist, and he's really motivated to acknowledge his clients to embrace and be with their pain in a way that invites a fuller life for them. And he's trained in various trauma resolution modalities and works with his clients to resolve trauma, which actually releases empathy towards oneself and toward others. And Stephan, as Chris mentioned, is a really dear friend of ours. And I know that as you spend time with him today, you're going to end up loving him as much as we do. He has a great depth of empathy himself, and has lived a life that has carved that kind of empathy and grace inside of him, and it just exudes from his being. And so I'm excited to have him with us today. Stephan, as we get started here, I wonder if you might just share with the attendees a little bit about like how this COVID crisis has impacted you.
Yeah, wow. We only have an hour to get into that. It's been a remarkable up and down journey. I'm assuming, Felina, that the majority of your guests are familiar with the Enneagram. So if I intersperse some of that in there, is that all right?
Yeah, I think the majority would be, yes.
Okay. And also I wanted to say happy anniversary to you again. Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah, when I think about, I would say it's been about 6 weeks now of that the higher level kind of COVID awareness. And the journey that I've been on resonates around the intensity of the feeling, the intensity of the emotion, and kind of getting lost in that. So I think initially that was what I was most aware of, was how heightened internally that heart intelligence center was. And so from fear to sadness, to anger, to confusion, to defensiveness. So I think I ended up kind of going deeply, deeply inside and kind of hunkering down in an isolation that I didn't quite know what to do with. And I think it took days to weeks for me to see my own dynamic and then begin to address it a little bit more fully, meaning I needed to do the things that were helpful to attend to some of that intensity. And so those waves come and go, but they aren't quite as high and they don't dip quite as low. I think on a very personal note. Yeah. You know, as you and I were sharing over the weekend and trying to determine what we would focus on today, the issue of grief came up. And I know I've talked with a number of people who seem to be exhibiting different aspects of grief and the way that's showing up during the crisis. So I wonder if we could jump in with the 5 stages of grief, if you could introduce that to our panel, our attendees, and then kind of break that down for us a little bit in terms of how those stages of grief might be playing out in our life right now. Yeah, I think right before that, I just want to say that this is a collective and right now in our lifetime unprecedented. So this has happened before to humanity, but we're experiencing something collectively, pandemically, that in our lifetimes we have not seen. And so that is going to come with its own array of novel experiences that are going to access those emotional points inside of us. So I think of the United States being a country that has had difficulty historically in addressing emotional duress or distress. And so we like to silver line, we like to move quickly through things, we like to accomplish. It's difficult for us to stay still for very long. And so it is the exact opposite of everything that grief intends for us to do. Grief is a process that is intended to slow us and to cause us to pause and to observe and to notice. And I think that's predominantly what this crisis is calling to us to do, but it is the opposite of what we want to do. And so, go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah, totally. I'm with you.
So when we look at the stages of grief, there have traditionally been kind of 5 that Kubler-Ross put together, and they came in the order of like shock or denial, then anger, then this depression or detachment, and then through to bargaining, and then acceptance. And I think she eventually saw that those were sort of limited in their scope to define the process. So then she added several more layers that attempted to define it, but didn't necessarily do a great job of explaining like how does that show up, or like how do individuals experience that, or for instance, like if I have complex trauma, like how am I going to experience another loss, or what if I have bereavement and compounded loss? So there's a lot of variables in there that the grief model that she presented fails to identify or really define.
Interesting. So how would you advise folks today to look at the stages of grief, or how they might be processing their grief, or how would you advise us to look at that?
So one thing that stands out is that it's a great framework. It's a great scaffolding, but it may not be helpful in terms of trying to locate oneself on the sort of like dip and the trough and then the rise of grief. It might be more helpful to locate oneself wherever oneself is. So it's a practice of noticing. So even the introductory meditation that you did, I found it super helpful. Like I've had 1,000 experiences already in one day with everything that's going on, and to pause and slow and notice my breathing, and to notice where my thoughts were at, to notice that, I was either clenching my shoulders or I had tenseness in my face. It was helpful just to notice for a moment where I was in my own process. And I think that can be an even more helpful exercise than even using the model of grief, because grief can be so convoluted and complex and confusing.
Yeah. So, for a lot of us, I think it's hard to even get a read on how we are. Mm-hmm. Or once we slow down and quiet down, we might have trouble identifying particular emotions, for example. Could you talk about the big emotions and what we might want to look for?
Yeah. Can I just validate what you said? Like that difficulty in slowing down well enough, or like long enough, or successfully enough to even figure out what we're experiencing. I think that part of that, again, is this sort of collective experience that we're having. And then again, on a very personal, a very like local note, this is exhausting. Like Chris has mentioned it in terms of like that weariness, like this is incredibly tiring. And I think that's what makes it stand out so much as grief, is that it sort of floods your experience. Your cognitive abilities decrease and your emotional capacities are just overcharged, and your body is carrying it all. And it's taxing, right? It takes everything. And so the normal higher functioning things that we like should be able to do, or that we've done normally in the past, like planning for the day, or like I have a certain level of stamina and I'm able to handle and distribute that throughout my day. And now I can't rely on that anymore. And so it makes us fight back, or it makes us feel the loss more intensely. And again, we don't necessarily want to face that loss. And so we retreat into another behavior, and it begins this cycle of like overactive troubleshooting that we may not even know is happening. And so we're like descending more and more deeply into this cycle in an attempt to mitigate it. Meanwhile, we're succumbing to it, which I think is another great process of grief. Like grief tires us so that we must face it. And it uses those emotions to gather our attention. And so when we're talking about those big 5 emotions, the scale that we're using, by the way, is from a therapy modality called timeline therapy, that essentially says that there's 5 big experienced emotions in childhood that start with anger, and then sadness, and anger, then fear, then sadness, then hurt, and then guilt. And from these 5, the rest emerge in complex derivations, meaning like I may have an anger as a child. If I'm not able to express it, it might show up in adulthood more like depression. So because I can't express, I turn it inward. Or it might turn into rage as a complex derivation. I overexpress and over-identify. Or, for instance, with fear, it might sublimate into a whole different area. Or guilt, in a complex way, is shame. Not only did I do something wrong, there's something wrong with me. I'm at fault. I'm the faulty piece. And so we begin to live out of the expressions of these 5 big emotions that then become lenses by which we see the world. And so I use the example, when I was 8 years old, I was in a go-kart and I crashed. Now, for some people, that's just, I crashed the go-kart and I get back in and I keep going around the track. For me, what it accessed was a deep inner fear, and I'd had experiences with fear up to that point. So in re-experiencing that alert in my body, which is a good thing, hey, you were in danger, I'm not able to necessarily reduce the level of danger and see it in perspective for what it is. Instead, it turns into terror. And terror, because it's connected to all these other experiences, begins to access the neural networks, connecting me to all these other emotions. So it's not just terror or fear, it's the sadness of the experience and being alone in it. And it's the anger because I shouldn't have done this, I'm so stupid. And it's the deep, deep shame because someone's going to find out and know that I'm faulty. And so then I have to hide, and then I'm even more alone. And so when we're talking about the big five emotions, some people may have gotten through childhood with better tools, right? Or not had as many traumatic experiences. And we want to acknowledge that as good, that's wonderful. But for those who are struggling right now, this grief is bringing up not only this circumstance, like a pandemic, but it's also accessing all these other neural networks of other things that have happened over which I don't have control. So grief accessing those big emotions is taking me into past moments or into future preoccupations without any recourse, unless I sort of notice and begin to attend to it. Meaning my sadness today is accessing my sadness from before and pulling me in.
Wow.
How do I attend to sadness?
Right. So can you talk about that? Like, how do we tend and attend what we're experiencing right now on a very personal, visceral, bodily, emotional, cognitive kind of way? How do we tend? How do we pay attention? What do we do? And maybe you can talk a little bit about the process of self-regulation.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think a little bit about the sense that we're going to move towards our emotions or towards that physical experience of emotions, or that kind of embodied form, or even begin to examine our thoughts about what we're experiencing only if we remain curious, right? And so this is the way we experience pain can either serve as a deterrent or serve as an invitation to enter more deeply into our experience. So what I see very commonly in the work that I do, or even in the ways that I've had to work through my own bag of stuff, is deep held judgment and belief around what I'm experiencing. So I'm foolish for feeling sad. Stop being so sad. That's ridiculous. Or like, don't waste your time on that. Or someone's going to find out. Or I think a number of people have any number of ways that they attempt to quiet their emotional experience, or perhaps overindulge their emotional experience, which would be more true on my part. We have to remain curious if we're ever to get near sort of those gates or those gatekeepers that would allow us to truly attend. So thinking about that overactive or underactive experience, in EMDR, do you know what EMDR is? It's that eye movement desensitization.
Yes.
So one of the things that they teach with EMDR is that there's a window of tolerance that is an appropriate expression of emotion. So in here, I have waves of emotion that are appropriate for any given experience. So I'm caught in traffic and I'm late somewhere and I get a little bit activated and I feel my heart rate increase or my blood pressure go up. And my mind starts to move quickly because I have somewhere to be. And now I'm going to be late and the people in front of me are holding me up. And if I'm staying within my window of tolerance, that's appropriate. I can be pretty irritated. And maybe within about 10, probably at most half an hour, I'm back to a normal or relatively stable state of emotion. What happens for those who have perhaps complex trauma or complex grief in this case, I'm gonna move outside of my window of tolerance, either into an overactivated state, into a very anxious or highly active or disorganized state, or I might shut down. I might get over depressed or dissociative, or lose my capacity to function altogether, where I can't find my thoughts and I can't feel my feelings, and then I'm kind of trapped. And that's what happens. Some people tend to major on one. Some people experience the height and then they fall into the depth, and they're outside of that window of tolerance. So one thing that I encourage people to do is to begin to notice when I'm having these activations, or when I'm shut down for 3 days and I can't get out of bed. What else am I hearing? What else am I experiencing in that internal dialogue, or in the way that my body won't stop or won't start, or how am I noticing what I'm doing and not doing? I think for those who live more in their head center, they may have more difficulty kind of locating themselves in their body. I know as a heart-centered person, I had difficult time activating my body. My body was the doorway to get activated, to do something about it. But I didn't know how to do that. So I would remain sort of under activated the majority of the time. I would get overwhelmed and then drop. And so it took me a while to kind of find energy or find intention or capacity to begin to address life again.
So is what you're describing with that window of tolerance and how we get underactivated or overactivated, is that getting into the way in which we get dysregulated during times of crisis? And so then when we begin to notice, oh yeah, I'm getting a little dysregulated here, I'm not coping maybe as well as I would like, how do we self-regulate? How do we self-soothe? How do we take care of ourselves when we notice that we're outside of that window of tolerance?
So I'm going to presume, that the majority of people, for the sake of this exercise, right, don't have years of complex trauma. So I can safely presume that when I am activated, for instance, I've just found out that I can't leave the house for a month, and then that the grocery stores are going to have limited hours, and that I can't just go visit my friend anymore. My favorite restaurant is closing, and I'm going to be trapped in the house with someone that I don't particularly like for who knows how long, right? Uncertainty at its root, fear, and fear accesses these other places inside of me, and I get overactivated. The first thing that I would want to do is notice and acknowledge. I have to be able to acknowledge before I can do anything about it. That's, for instance, if I judge it, or if I fight against it and try to attack it, it's my partner who's bothering me, or my mom and dad just don't get it, or the government, right? The government is causing all of this, or spend 5 minutes on cable news or on Twitter, and you're going to be activated to some degree, right? And so it's the capacity that you're developing to step back from that and acknowledge what it is that you're experiencing. I'm under duress, right? I'm in distress. This is overwhelming for me. I don't know what to do. I mean, it might sound like even hearing your judgment, like, get over it, and hearing what that's intended to do, which might be to protect you from some of the pain. Well, if my judgment's trying to protect me from pain, it doesn't necessarily know that I need something. I ask my clients this all the time, like, what is it that you need in this moment? Like, what is it that a child who's experiencing fear, what do they need? And they'll look up sheepishly and be like, I know, they need comfort. They need comfort, but I don't know how to give comfort. But to give comfort, we have to acknowledge, and we have to move towards it. I have to get real close to it and be like, I know you're afraid. I know this is overwhelming. I know you don't even know what to do. And you have another eight weeks in quarantine. This is at minimum an inconvenience, and for a lot of people, this is great tragedy. We're losing mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, right? This is terrifying, and it has great repercussions, and I don't know what to do. That leaves me feeling powerless. and unable, and I don't know how to affect my life. And I may not have all the tools in place for me to be able to handle this well. Right?
Yeah, it's such an intense time, isn't it? I mean, it just seems that we are all being pressed and pressurized and forced in a way to look deeply at ourselves individually, within our little communities, and then the larger collective planetary connections that we have. And it really is a lot. I in the last couple of weeks with these webinars, a lot of people have been voicing that they are fatigued, they're weary, they're exhausted. And then, like I mentioned, just in some of my interactions with people, just seeing signs of grief, and maybe they don't realize they're grieving. And so this is an extraordinary time for all of us, it seems, to have an opportunity for some of us to do some inner work, maybe for the first time, to go into those places of soul that perhaps we've avoided or neglected. And yet it seems to me that this is a treasured opportunity, that we're being invited to discover our capacity, that we're greater than we realize, and that there's more to us than we've acknowledged. It seems like a terrifying and incredible, exciting opportunity to evolve, to grow, to discover more of who we are.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd be open to turning, going into the, what do I want to say? I've got so many thoughts. I think I'd like to invite the attendees to engage a little bit with us. Would that be okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so if you're in the audience, I want to invite you to engage with us here. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to invite you to raise your hand. So there's a way for you, and Elizabeth has raised her hand. So I'm sorry, I don't really know how to direct you to do this, but if you play around with your Zoom, you'll find an option to raise your hand, and then we'll call on you. And so let me just see here. And I'm going to try, so let me see here how I want to do this. I'm going to allow Elizabeth to talk. Elizabeth, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, we can hear you. I wonder, would you like to stay on microphone, or would you be interested if I would move you into a mode so that we can see you on screen?
You can let me see. I don't know what my hair looks like. It is clean.
Okay, here we go. Let's see if we can get you. Are you there, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay, see if you can turn on your video.
Okay. I'm trying here.
I see your screen, your video screen, but I don't see you yet.
Okay. I clicked I got the spinning circle here.
Okay, no worries. Let's just continue without video. And what would you like to ask Stephan?
So Stephan, I really appreciate what you said, and I've been on a journey of doing a lot of the deep work. So I'm just curious, you talked about noticing and then acknowledging what is happening.
Yeah.
And what comes after acknowledging? So
the idea of responding to what you've noticed now comes next. So I kind of call this the attending to the inner child or the soul child, and from the point of view of the objective observer. And the objective observer, some modalities call it the leader, or like the adult. So I have a full lifetime of experiences that I've managed to move through. Some horrifying and terrible, and some wonderful. And in those moments where that primal emotion is accessed, that fear, for instance, or that sadness, that's from the point of view of a child who experience something very difficult and overwhelming for them. But the objective observer knows that there's a story arc of the entire story, the entire lifetime lived, for instance. So I'm not just that child anymore caught in my sadness. I become the objective leader who can now do something for the child. So once I notice the child, it's the idea of reparenting, essentially. Like, I'm able to offer the child something different than what the child was able to do for themselves in the place of pain or sadness or great fear. And so responding to the emotional state, the emotional demand, requires that I do something. It doesn't have to be dramatic, or it doesn't have to heal the whole system. Oftentimes it's just what I know to do next.
Yeah, thank you, Stephan.
Hey, that's helpful.
Yeah, and thank you, Elizabeth, for your question.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. It's good to hear your voice. All right, let's see if anyone else would like to engage with Stephan. Just raise your hand and I'll call on you and we'll turn your microphone on. All right, Janae, let's see. Hi, Janae, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have also been on this journey of self-help and kind of learning to figure out how to love myself before this started. And then I've used this time as kind of really digging in deeper as to like why it is that I maybe don't respect myself like I should, and just trying to become my own best friend, because that's kind of my option right now. However, and for the first month, I feel like I've done really well with that. And now I'm starting to get antsy, and I'm not sure where that's coming from or why. And I was just wondering if you had any advice.
Yeah, I think through the process of growth and healing that happens throughout the entirety of our lives, right? There's a moment that we become aware, and our journey essentially begins there, when I'm able to sort of see beyond the veil of maybe my ego or my own BS, and you start to attempt to embrace this person that's you, with all their flaws and contradictions and hypocrisies. And so I just want you to know, I identify very much with what you're saying. Like, there's a capacity that I reach, and then I'm like over it, and I'm super anxious and just want to sit around and do nothing. And again, I think it's an opportunity for that the observer to come out. The observer doesn't judge. He doesn't require or demand. He just notices. And so I liken it to seeing a baby. And if I see a baby who's having a fit and makes a mess in the diaper and then throws up their food and then throws another fit and it's just very uncomfortable, I have an understanding that it's a baby. And so I can't judge it, and I can't require that it change its behavior, and I can't speak to it like an adult with analysis. Like, if you behave this way instead, you would, accomplish your dreams and make your dreams a reality, or you shouldn't be doing that. The baby has no awareness. The baby isn't able to comprehend. And I think for our agitated or activated states, they're operating from something very primordial and it's like almost mythical inside of us. It's a story that was created way before we had awareness. And so when those parts of us show up, the adult in us tends to want to push them, or to corral them, or to shake them and stop doing that. And we miss out, I think, on an opportunity to just be with them in their pain, to show them presence, and to really acknowledge, respond, even relinquish the rights to alter their behavior. In noticing and responding, we're just being with them, which is just being with ourselves.
And Stephan, can you say something about, like, what's the power of being with? This is interesting because this crisis is forcing us to be with in a way that many of us have not really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so here, and then in what you're describing with this this deeper inner work that we're invited to. And I know this is true in my work with contemplation and spiritual direction. There's great power in being with, even though we avoid that and resist it so much. Can you speak to that power? What's the point? Why go to the trouble to be with?
Yeah, it's so uncomfortable and oftentimes so lonely. And it accesses, again, these places within us that are the places where the pain is almost deified. It's so defining, especially these early childhood things that don't necessarily need to be traumatic to have been difficult for the child to do or experience. Again, so much of this is through the child's perception, our child within the perception of our child. And so the idea of being with ourselves in that pain, or I come from a Christian model. It's like I'm encountering God in me when I am being with myself. I'm encountering what is beautiful about me in the spaces of the pain and the loneliness and the isolation. And the only way I can do that is to move through the suffering. The suffering is inviting us to discover who we really are. Like you said, Galina, there's capacity in that. I'm discovering that my capacity goes deeper than my perceived limitation.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing that when we're in pain, we resist the pain, we avoid the pain, we do everything we can but be with it. That's the hardest thing for us. And when we're not with it, if we're a person of faith, we often feel as if like God has abandoned us. Like we have no connection. We feel so isolated and cut off, right?
Yeah.
That then it's in the being with what is that opens a channel to the presence of divinity and spirit and our higher self. It's like suddenly the very thing that we've avoided becomes our medicine. When we can sit with it, it becomes the very thing that connects us to ultimate reality, the ground of our being, like that our greater capacity.
Yeah.
It's remarkable, isn't it? That the medicine is right there within our reach, but we resist it and avoid it.
Constantly, repeatedly. And I think that's why it takes such patience. What Janae was saying, like, I'm getting antsy. Like, I did that well for the first few weeks, and now what? I felt that so deeply because I think it is almost ad nauseum. I keep having to do this. I keep having to get near this and then embrace what is. And again and again.
Yeah. Victoria's raising her hand. I'm going to invite her in. And hey, Victoria.
Hey, am I in?
Hi there. Hey, would you be open to trying your video if I can move you over to panelists so you can turn your video on?
Yeah, for sure. Let's try it.
Okay.
Hi.
Hey, hi, Victoria.
Hi.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say I really appreciated the conversation. And what we were just talking about in terms of like constantly having to release or like let go of our preferences. Like I just find that coming up in me so much in terms of the self-awareness work, that I realize how often I contract due to just my preferences no longer being available to me. And just how much that process of really letting go and releasing allows me to like reorient around an unfixed identity, and just realizing like I'm so much greater than my fixed idea of identity. I'm so far beyond that, and I've just really I just hear that so much in terms of like the collective experience that we're all having. it really being from a place of like, where sort of our eyes are awakening to how limited of a scope we and the challenge that this is now to just like release and continue to like let go and let go even more of what we like, of our limited perceptions of self.
Yeah, I want that. Give me some of that.
Yeah, I mean, we sit on our, we sit on bended knee asking for it, and then
right.
To us, it's, wait a second. So.
That's such a good way to put it. What it made me think about was sort of the way that sometimes pain is the only motivation. We want to think of ourselves as like enlightened and growing people, but I avoid it constantly. I want my comforts, and I want my cushions, and I want control and predictability and pattern. And when that's thrown into question outside of my control, what comes up but my pain?
Right.
And what do I do but fight against it and rail against the reality that's happening? This is what's happening to me now, and I cannot avoid it.
Yeah, and just resting in that place of total surrender and acceptance, and again making contact with the breath and making contact with the present moment, and just realizing like at the core of all things, all is well. Yeah,
I want your level of peace because I'm still fighting.
Me too. Me too, for sure. Yeah, every day. It's a constant ebb and flow. Yeah.
Sure,
yeah, I've really appreciated the conversation.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Victoria.
Yeah.
I'm going to call on the next person here.
Can I share a quick story?
Yeah, please.
I think it reminds me when she was talking, when my mother passed away about 1.5 years ago, and I went through something very similar in terms of the reaction. At first, the way that I dealt with it was like a rise in energy, and I'm going to be able to move through this, and I've had the training for this, and I pushed really hard. And then there was a decline that happened that brought in all sorts of confusions about the way that I was managing the situation. It was something out of my control. It was unexpected. And then the grief bomb didn't hit fully until several months afterwards. I think I felt incredibly sad, but I was managing. And then it all sort of just fell through like sand through my fingers. And it was such a confusing time after that. I don't think that I'm fully even through that grief, but that understanding that grief and understanding myself through that grief gave me somewhat of a predictable lens to be kinder to myself in this process, because, hey, this is hard. This is difficult, not only for you, for everybody. Everybody is losing something. Gave me a patience and a language.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Stephan. I'm going to call on Dan. Let's see. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Would you be open to coming over into the panelist view so that we can see your video?
Sure. I'll push a button if you make it available.
I'm promoting you to panelist. And then from here, shoot, not there yet. Let's try again. Promote to panelist. And are you seeing an invitation there or no? Uh-oh, Dan, are you there? I think we lost Dan. Dan, where'd you go?
Come back.
Seriously, I don't know what happened. I guess he'll have to find his way back in. In the meantime, would anyone else like to engage with Stephan? Just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Deborah Balters, here we go. Hey there, Deborah.
Hey, how are ya?
Good, how are you?
Good. I just have a quick question for Stephan. Do you mind saying your Enneagram type?
No, not at all. I'm a 4.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious in the language that you used. So do you ever think about the role that bringing our awareness to our passions and fixations, and then our holy ideas and virtues play in leading us to a greater detachment from things, from unhealthy mindsets?
Mm-hmm. Only constantly. Only day in and day out.
I'm with you. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? What that's like for you?
Yeah. So I'm 4 on the Enneagram.
Uh-huh.
So it's been a really helpful thing for me to pay attention to and to bring my awareness to when I do find myself attaching to things. Mm-hmm. If I move back to my holy idea, that I am connected to the divine, that there is nothing that I need to do or to be or to have, that I'm whole and complete, then it causes me to move away from that longing. And so, yeah, it's been a really helpful thing for me. So I just wondered how you experienced that. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, thank you. It's really interesting that the last 3 people that have spoken have kind of gone through the progressive order that I was laying out in terms of kind of acknowledging and then responding to the pain and then kind of recollecting, being able to sort of center oneself and then relinquishing the attachments. Like, I have to be able to let go of these experiences in order to keep moving forward. I can't access a pattern of the past or predictive pattern of the future to determine what's happening in my present. And then just now, this idea of readjusting, I have to remain flexible in order to manage what is now. So if I'm moving through towards my passions or the fixation, I'm getting overly sad, melancholic about my situation, it doesn't necessarily serve. So I must keep my intention in mind. Yeah. And the equanimity is what serves us well then. Like, okay, I'm having the intensity of my feeling, but I'm able to stand beside it somehow and still take care of it.
Yeah, I'll just say this one last quick thing. The one thing that's been super helpful for me is that in the Facets of Unity, the Almas book, when he talks about basic trust, living in that place of basic trust that all will be well, and that we may struggle, but in the end, all will be well, versus moving outside of ourselves and living in the ego, seeking to manage and control things. And then we end up in that suffering attachment. Anyhow, so
that's
I was
good.
Just curious. Thank you so much for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. It looks like Dan has found his way in here. So I'm going to call on Dan and see if we can get his, see if we can get his video on. There he is. Hi, Dan. We lost you there for a minute.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you about, how do I help my family work through this grief? Do you have any resources or thoughts about, I've got a family of four boys and my wife, and I know they're feeling it, and some of them express it more and better than others, but other ones are just, like, I've got a kiddo who is probably he resembles a 7, and, whenever you ask him, how's it going? Oh, it's fine.
Fine.
And my kiddo who resembles a 4, yeah, it's just a bummer. I can't see my friends. But like, I want to help them go deeper. What do you suggest?
So it makes me think immediately that the timetables for everyone to move through grief are distinct. I think everyone's going to experience it not only uniquely, but in the order in which they're able to deal. And so I think you as a parent, what I often tell my parent clients is you're modeling it for them. They're watching you. The young ones all the way through the teenage, adolescent, as they're forming themselves, they're still watching you. And so the best thing that I can recommend is that if you're able to hold space for yourself and how you're processing and live that out honestly in front of them, essentially creating space for them to feel whatever they're feeling, right? Without the judgment, without the necessity, the demand for them to change or to be something different or to experience it different, without the preoccupation that it should be or could be different. It just is what it is. These are the way my kids are experiencing. and still be able to be present with them in that, you're doing wonderful. You're doing wonderful. They can rely on that. That's a point of reference outside of myself that gives me an example.
Thank you, Dan, for raising that. I'm sure there's a lot of parents here that can really benefit from your insight there, Stephan. Thank you. We're running out of time, so I'm going to dismiss Dan, and we have time for just 2 more questions. If we can keep these rather brief, because we are running out of time, but Daniel and Debbie have had their hand up for a while. So I'm going to call on Daniel next. Daniel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Awesome. Yes, go ahead and address Stephan.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This has been wonderful. Stephan, I thank you again just for everything that you've shared. I was excited because I saw that you're originally from Puerto Rico, and I'm half Puerto Rican, and so yeah, so I felt a kindred spirit with you already. My question has been, I've been on as many have shared, I've been on this kind of healing journey for myself for a couple of years now, and been working with my counselor. And recently he's asked me to go through an exercise where I kind of go through some significant experiences in my life where I think that I have experienced some trauma, and to write out the story that I tell myself about that experience. And I'm finding this so challenging because I'm having to kind of, as you expressed before, kind of accessing that inner observer, which kind of forces me to try to look objectively at my story. And I'm finding it so difficult to look objectively at my story. I'm writing this story and telling myself, this feels like the truth, even though I know that it can't be the full truth, And so I guess my question is just if you could speak to that process of just, how difficult it is to sort of look objectively at our own stories, and then how I can begin to move past that so I can write a new story that is empowering, because there are costs and benefits, right, to the way that the story that I'm telling myself. And if I decide that the costs are just too much, then I do have the power to write a new story.
Yeah.
But it's so challenging. Yeah. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
What a great question. Immediately what came to mind was that this is cumulative for the entirety of our lives, right? And I think our perspective about our stories is in continual flux because we see ourselves differently as we continue to grow and mature. So my first or initial experiences with healing or with presence with myself were illuminatory in a way that set me off on the journey, but then they ceased to be enough. And so it gave me a hunger to keep searching and to keep asking questions and to keep awakening and reawakening to myself. And oftentimes the call or the invitation was to look at the pain of these experiences.
Yeah.
So anyway, I applaud you and congratulate you for undergoing this journey, right? And I would also use the fodder that's in front of you, the frustration or the difficulty that you're finding in coming up with a story or an objective story around your experiences is part of the process. Yeah. That frustration is going to lead you somewhere. There are stories that I believed that I had the correct interpretation about because they were my perception, until my perception was reality, until I had a novel thought or a novel experience that made me question the past, right? What happened when I was 12 and my dad told me to, pull myself out of this mud pit that I was in. And I thought my dad left me. He abandoned me. I'm abandoned. And then later I realized, wait a second, how did I get out? Oh my God, I pulled myself out. I'm strong. I'm capable.
Yeah.
My dad didn't do it maybe the right way, but my learning or my takeaway was I'm able.
That's good.
I couldn't have accessed that when I was, 12 or 15.
Right.
Thank you, Stephan, and thank you, Daniel, for your vulnerability and asking the question.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to call on Debbie, who gets the last question of the day. And so, Debbie, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead and address Stephan.
Okay, I'll try to make it brief, but I feel pretty peaceful in the daytime, but then I have these chronic nightmares, and I'm always trying to save my family or save people that are already passed, and I always fail. And then I wake up and the emotions of the dream linger. It's like, so it's very disruptive, and I haven't quite figured out, because I think I'm doing okay in the daytime, then there we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that tenderness.
Thank you.
You know, there is a sense that this, again, this grief, whether collective, individual, or both, is sort of pressing to the surface some of these things that have laid dormant. Or I always say, your body's going to let you know when it's time and you're ready to deal with something.
Okay.
You can trust that now is the time. If you're bringing it up, right? If my thoughts can't get away from it, or my emotions, like the louder the crying baby gets, the more urgent it is to go and be near them. And so the louder that my emotions are getting around something, or the more pressure I'm applying to push it away, that's the sound of the invitation, right? So our dreams, in essence, I believe, to be an attempt for us to process. Our body is and our brain are conspiring to process painful things. And so the posture of getting curious again, while being incredibly gentle with that, because we don't want to force it open, and we don't just want to analyze it and answer it and dictate what you need to do. But more, even just what happened right now, you allowed yourself to express it and to notice it and to get near to it. And it was tender. It hurts.
Yeah.
I think that's so brave, because there's so much in there.
Yeah, thank you.
So continue to do that. I think in recollecting it, or maybe perhaps in writing it down, the pain becomes an invitation to honor your experience. Because what I see is someone who really cares about their family and has concern.
Yeah,
Maybe doesn't know what to do. And that's a beautiful expression of care.
Yeah.
Thank you, Debbie, for being willing to engage with us at that level of vulnerability. And thank you, Stephan, for your empathy and your insight for all of us today. This is bringing us to the end of our time together. Before I turn it over to Chris for some outros, I wonder if we could all just take a moment to return our mindfulness on the breath. You might even place one hand on the heart. Just let yourself come back into yourself, as we have been holding one another here and taking in a lot from each other. Just gather your energy and return to yourself. And notice the breath moving in and down, up and out. Notice your inner resources. Notice how much resource you have and how depleted you might be. Without judgment, just take some inventory here to see how your inner resources are. And take a moment to consider your next step in light of that inventory. Whether it's to do some more tending to yourself, self-nurturing, self-soothing, or if you have sufficient resource to be available to someone else who's in need. So just take an honest inventory and consider the next step. And then take a moment to bring the palms together at the heart, cultivating some gratitude for Stephan, for his willingness to be present to all of us today. Just sending out vibrations of gratitude for him and his family. Just surrounding him with support and gratitude. And we'll look forward to being with all of you again in the next webinar that you attend. With that, I want to turn it back over to Chris.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephan. Really grateful to consider you a friend, but have so much respect and admiration for you and your work. Thank you, Felina, for facilitating that, and thank you, everybody, for your questions and your vulnerability. I know a lot of us are feeling alone. I actually had ran out of coffee this weekend and hit up one of my pals in town. He runs a little spot called Archetype, and I texted him and I just said, hey, are you guys delivering online or what's the deal? And he said, actually, coffee's considered essential. And I thought, that's kind of funny, like this whole reprioritizing what are essential services and what does and doesn't count. So anyway, I ran down and picked up some coffee, and of course stayed as far away from Isaiah as I could, but it kind of struck me odd. I was at the market 10 days ago and haven't really seen anyone other than my dog or Felina. And just even seeing Isaiah for a second kind of opened something up in me. And it just helped me remember that even though some of us feel alone, we're alone together. And I think this kind of new togetherness that we're creating is going to guide us forward. And so thank you for joining us. Thank you for being together with us on these wellness webinars. I just want to apologize for going over a little bit late, and then just want to remind you as we sign off here, what it is that we make available to you all. And so I'm going to leave this slide up here on the screen as we say goodbye. But once again, on Mondays, we invite you for whole health conversations with mental and mental health providers and as well as healthcare specialists and doctors. And don't forget this. I know we're all looking to our therapists and our counselors right now, but they're also needing care. And so send them a cup of coffee or a bag of coffee or whatever it is that you think would help them, and make sure that we don't forget the people that we need the most and who are caring for us the most right now. On Wednesday, we'll continue to offer guided spiritual practice and a kind of Q&R afterwards. I know it's not sort of group spiritual direction, but at least something that's conversational and hopefully helpful. And then, of course, our Kids Contemplation Fridays is for all the little kids in your life as well as the inner child. So please join us. We'll continue to do these through the end of April and maybe beyond, but just really glad that we are alone together and that we are going to make it together. And so have a great week and take care of yourselves.